Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. If you're sitting on the right-hand side of the airplane, in a few moments, you're going to have a great view of Manhattan. Okay, that's great, but I'm sitting on the left-hand side of the airplane. This is a video describing how you can actually get the best photos of Manhattan from your airplane. And it's all about sitting on the appropriate side of the airplane and what you can do to try to get the best seat to try to get the best photo. There are 3 airports in New York City: Kennedy Airport in Queens, LaGuardia Airport, which is also in Queens, and Newark Liberty Airport, which is in New Jersey. Now, different airports provide different approaches based upon the airspace. So there is a lot of complexity in the airspace in New York City, and depending on which airport you're going to fly into will dictate the route that you are going to take. You need to be aware of the current situation, what's going on in the airspace, in order to be able to shoot the best photo. So in this video, I'm going to focus primarily on LaGuardia Airport, and I'm going to talk about the things that you can do to pick the best seat on the airplane to get the best photo of Manhattan. Now, there are a lot of videos out there that focus on the best seat in terms of comfort, in terms of legroom, in terms of, let's say, proximity to the lavatory. Is it in front of the wing or behind the wing? I'm not going to talk about that at all in this video. I can save that for perhaps another video in the future. What I'm going to talk about is which side of the airplane should you sit on, the right side or the left side. Most people don't consider the right-hand side or the left-hand side of an airplane when they're booking a seat. They're really focused on comfort. They're focused on extra legroom, which particular cabin are they in. But for certain people who are looking to get a great photo of New York City as they're coming into the airports, the side of the airplane is very important. The runway that you are going to land on is going to be a key factor in understanding if you are going to be able to get that great photo prior to landing. So the idea is that as you board your aircraft or prior to boarding your aircraft, if there are extra seats available and you find that you are on the wrong side of the airplane, I always recommend changing to the other side of the airplane that's going to provide you with the better view based upon what I'm going to tell you. So how do you know exactly what the view is going to be? How do you know that Manhattan is going to be on the right-hand side? How do you know that Manhattan is going to be on the left-hand side? Well, what you need to look at is the weather forecast for the time of your arrival. You need to determine a few things. Number one, what's the visibility going to be like? Because if it's going to be a foggy day, it probably doesn't matter to you because you're not going to get any photos at all. If there's going to be a low cloud cover, well, same exact situation. There's really not going to be a lot of things you'll be able to take pictures of. But if the clouds are above, say, around 5,000 feet and the visibility is pretty decent, chances are that you'll be able to see a lot out of your aircraft window, whether it's the daytime or nighttime. So the most important factor for you to consider when you're trying to pick which side of the airplane you should sit on is the wind. Which direction are the winds coming out of? Are they coming out of the north? Are they coming out of the south? Are they coming out of the east? Are they coming out of the west? Because the wind determines the runway that you are going to land on. All aircraft land into the wind. So it's important to understand that if you are going to be landing on a particular runway, you are going to be landing in the direction that the wind is coming from. So let's say the wind is coming out of the south, you are probably going to be landing towards the south. Now, this video focuses on the final few moments of a flight, the last few minutes prior to touchdown, which is when you're low, close to the ground, and able to get those great views. Be aware that flights coming into LaGuardia generally come into the New York City airspace from 3 general directions. The first one is flights from the south. For example, flights that come from Florida. Those flights basically fly up the eastern seaboard and approach the New York City area just south of New York City around the Verrazano Bridge. There's also another set of flights of aircraft that are coming from the west. For example, Chicago. Those aircraft fly across the country and descend over Pennsylvania and New Jersey and approach that area around the Verrazano Bridge before they arrive in the New York City area. The final set of aircraft are aircraft that are coming from the north. For example, Boston or Toronto. Those aircraft approach from the northern areas and arrive in the New York City airspace around the Connecticut-Westchester County border before they get closer. Those arrival routes are almost always the same, and I'll reference them throughout the video. But what's most important is to understand what's going on in the airspace at a lower altitude moments before you land so you can get those great photos. So let's take a look at some of the wind directions and the different possibilities of you landing on different runways at LaGuardia Airport, and then we'll talk about the views that you'll be able to get. Let's start with wind coming out of the north. When wind is coming out of the north, when you approach LaGuardia Airport, once you're within about 10 miles or so, you are going to be landing towards the north. So if you've got wind that's coming, let's say, from around 360 degrees heading towards the south, chances are that you're going to be landing on runway 4 or runway 31. Both runway 4 and runway 31 have similar approaches. The first scenario that I'm going to talk about is landing on runway 4. So how do you know if you're going to land on runway 4? While this is not always 100% the case, if the winds are generally coming from around 40 degrees, which is the northeast, to approximately 130 degrees, which is the southeast, you'll almost always land on runway 4. This wind direction range is approximately good for both arrivals and departures. So let's say if you've determined that you're going to be landing on runway 4 and you want to get a great picture of Manhattan. Which side of the airplane should you sit on? The answer is the left-hand side. And this applies to every single arrival into LaGuardia coming into runway 4. If you're on the arrival route that's coming in from the south, going up the eastern seaboard, you're basically going to be flying straight into LaGuardia Airport towards runway 4, and as you get close to New York City, Manhattan is going to be on the left-hand side of the airplane, so you're going to get a fantastic view of Manhattan on the left-hand side. If you're coming in over the state of Pennsylvania and New Jersey, just when you're south of New York City, you're going to turn towards the left and up towards New York City, and Manhattan will be, again, on the left-hand side of the airplane. Now, if you're coming in from the north, so let's say you're flying in from a city like Boston or Toronto, you are in for a great treat because generally, once the aircraft get close to New York City, we'll follow the Hudson River southbound. And if you're following the Hudson River southbound and you're on the left-hand side of the airplane again, you are going to get a spectacular and very close-in view of Manhattan. Once you get around the south tip of Manhattan, you're going to make a left-hand turn and you'll still see Manhattan on the left-hand side of the airplane as you proceed towards the north, towards runway 4. So remember, if the wind is between around 40 degrees and 130 degrees, that's the northeast or the southeast, you're going to probably land on runway 4, so you'll want to sit on the left-hand side of the airplane. Let's talk about landing on runway 31. If the wind is coming from around 40 degrees, which is the northeast, to around 310 degrees, which is the northwest, you may land on runway 31. Now, for the most part, when you're landing on runway 31, LaGuardia is often using an approach called the Expressway Visual Runway 31. In order for them to use this approach, the weather has to be pretty good. So you need to have a ceiling of about maybe 3,000 feet or so, and the visibility should be pretty decent, no less than about 5 miles. So if the visibility and the ceiling is going to be bad that day, you're probably not going to fly on the Expressway Visual Runway 31 approach. So that's a sign that you don't really need to consider what I'm about to talk about. But if you've determined that you are going to be landing on runway 31, just like landing on runway 4, I highly recommend sitting on the left-hand side of the airplane. If you're coming in from the south, coming up the eastern seaboard, say from Florida, you're basically going to fly right towards New York City over Brooklyn and Queens, and Manhattan is going to be on the left-hand side of the airplane. Then, once you get over Queens, you're actually going to make a right-hand turn to follow the Long Island Expressway, and you'll get a great view of the airport just before you make a sweeping left-hand turn to land on that runway. If you're taking that arrival route where you fly over Pennsylvania and New Jersey, the approach is going to be pretty much the same. Once you get to the New York City area, you're going to make a left-hand turn over Brooklyn and Queens, and Manhattan is going to be on the left-hand side of the airplane, so you'll get that great view. And again, you'll turn right over the Long Island Expressway, and then you'll make a left-hand turn, keeping LaGuardia Airport in sight off to the left side of the aircraft. If you're coming from the north, there's a bunch of different things that can happen, but one of the most common things is that you'll fly down the Hudson River, and once you've passed Manhattan, which is going to be on your left-hand side, you are then going to make a left-hand turn back north again, keeping Manhattan in view again on the left-hand side of the airplane. And just like the other approaches, once you get over Queens, you're going to follow the Long Island Expressway and make a left-hand turn to land on runway 31. So if you're landing on runway 31, you want to sit on the left-hand side of the airplane. That's the most commonly used approach. Now, there is another approach that's also used to runway 31, which is used when the wind is coming out of the northwest, and the wind is generally fairly strong. If you're coming in from the south or coming in from over New Jersey, Pennsylvania area, you generally are going to fly over Queens and Brooklyn. And again, Manhattan is going to be on your left-hand side of the airplane, but you're going to be at a higher altitude. You're going to fly right over LaGuardia Airport and then make a turn to the right and circle back around pretty much over the Long Island and Queens area. So if you want that view of Manhattan, again, for landing on runway 31, you'll want to sit on the left-hand side of the airplane. If they're flying that particular approach to runway 31 where they're flying straight in and you're coming out of the north, things can vary, but most often you're going to spend more time over Long Island and the Queens area, and you're really not going to get a great view of Manhattan, so it's kind of irrelevant. Now, if the wind is coming from around 220 degrees to approximately 130 degrees, you'll want to sit on the right-hand side of the airplane if you are coming from the south or coming from the west from over Pennsylvania, New Jersey. Because if you fly this approach, you are going to be flying up the Hudson River. So if you're sitting on the right-hand side going northbound on the Hudson River, you're going to get a fantastic view of Manhattan. Once you get past Manhattan, you'll continue north, fly over either the Bronx or Westchester, make a right-hand turn, and then come right back down to land on runway 22. So the right-hand side of the aircraft is the best side of the airplane to sit on. Now, if you're coming in from the north, you're really going to be flying primarily over Westchester and the Bronx, so you're not going to see Manhattan very well, so it really doesn't matter which side of the airplane you sit on. If the wind is coming from around 220 degrees to approximately 310 degrees, which is the northwest, you can also land on runway 22. Let's talk about the different approaches. If you're coming from the south or coming from the west over New Jersey, Pennsylvania area, you are going to fly northbound past the airport and turn around. But this time, you are actually going to be doing that towards the Brooklyn and Queens side, so Manhattan will be off to your left. You'll be at a higher altitude, but you still will see Manhattan off the left-hand side of the airplane. Once you get past Brooklyn and Queens, you'll then fly over the Bronx and Westchester, then make a left-hand turn and turn back around to land on runway 22. Now, there's another runway at LaGuardia that's not used as often for arrivals, and that is runway 13. It's very difficult to determine which side of the airplane you should sit on if you're landing on runway 13, and generally when you're landing on runway 13, the wind is coming anywhere between 40 degrees and 220 degrees, so that is a 180-degree turnaround. So I really wouldn't place my bets on landing on runway 13 as it's quite rare. So what if there's no wind at all? How do you know what runway you're going to land on? Well, chances are that if the wind is calm, LaGuardia generally likes to land on runway 22 using that approach where you'll come up the Hudson River and make the right-hand turn if you're coming from the south or if you're coming from the New Jersey, Pennsylvania area. So in a situation when there is no wind, I often recommend sitting on the right-hand side of the airplane. If you're coming from the north, it doesn't really matter because you'll just be flying straight in over Westchester County and the Bronx. Well, I hope you enjoyed my suggestions on how to find the right side of the airplane to sit on when you're coming into LaGuardia Airport. Of course, this always depends upon last-minute seat availability, but if you can figure out what runway you're going to land on in advance, I always recommend changing to the appropriate side of the airplane so you can get that great view of Manhattan. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for more.